Good morning. Today we're down at the wonderful Wings Aviation Museum in Balcombe, Sussex, where we're holding a special private viewing of our first Cold War exhibit. So follow on and enjoy the presentations. The Wings Museum's main aim is to educate future generations about the sacrifices made by so many during the wars in order to try and preserve the peace we all benefit from today. We honour the memories of those that are involved. Our new exhibit focuses on a very unique piece of British history, the Cold War and thermonuclear cloud sampling, and it's going to be opening to the public from the 1st of May 2026. We have two special guests joining us today, and there will also be a presentation with some food and drinks. The new exhibit is called Into the Atom, and today is actually the anniversary of Britain's largest nuclear detonation, known as Operation Grapple, which was carried out in 1957 and 58, some 68 years ago.
You've got to draw up name tags, Kevin.
So these are for all the guests that are coming along today. Yeah.
I'd like to start by welcoming everybody and thanking you for coming to the Wings Museum today on this, which is actually the 68th anniversary to the day of Operation Grapple Y. Can everybody hear me? I hope you'll bear with me a little bit while I just give you a little bit of history on the Wings Museum. My name is Kevin Hunt, and this is my brother Daniel Hunt. We are the founding curators of the Wings Museum. The story of the Wings Museum begins with a family walk one Easter weekend back in 1980. But this would turn out to be one of those days that would shape the lives of two young brothers forever. As the family walked along the concrete trackways in East Anglia, something rusty lay in the mud beside the track. Dad picked this up, thinking it looked interesting, and showed it to his two young sons. This rusty lump of metal was once a gun sight from a Browning .50 caliber machine gun. The trackway the family walked on, now covered in weeds and moss, was once a perimeter track that mighty B-24 bombers taxied along on their way to bomb targets in Germany. They were in fact walking in the footsteps of young American GIs who were thousands of miles from home fighting the war to stop Nazi aggression during World War II. The two brothers, Daniel and Kevin, held that gun sight in their hands, their imagination being taken back some 40 years earlier. It was not long before scavenging around in the undergrowth that more wartime relics surfaced. An engine cowling with a shrapnel hole through it, with the aircraft serial number stenciled on the back, was found. Research would reveal that this panel was from a B-24 Liberator, nicknamed Hard to Get, but had been got on the 5th of August 1944, having been seriously damaged by flak and crash landed back on the airfield. A pair of glasses, mess tins, aftershave bottles, reminders of the past also discovered. Unbeknown to their father Brian, this gun sight had planted a seed in those young minds that would lead the two brothers to dedicate their lives to the remembrance of all those who lived, endured and often paid the ultimate sacrifice during World War II. For Kevin, his interest in World War II would be further fuelled by school projects on the subject. For his younger brother Daniel, his enthusiasm would be fed by his older brother's interest. As adults, they were able to follow up on this interest and began scouring the countryside for relics from World War II. The collection started under a bed and soon filled their bedrooms and spare room. It continued to grow into the garage. As time went by, the collection got bigger and bigger. The two brothers and their father Brian wanted these items of heritage to be shared with people, so the idea of a museum was born. Brian and his two sons, Kevin and Daniel Hunt, would put on public one-day displays wherever they could. But at the end of the day, with so much positive reaction from visitors, they found it heartbreaking to pull it all apart and put it back into storage. Finally, in the early 2000s, a hut was rented on Red Hill Aerodrome, which was once the gas decontamination centre for RAF Red Hill. The collection grew and grew, and items got bigger and bigger. The brothers and their father travelled all over Europe, working with historians and search teams. Wrecks were discovered in Russia, lost in the tundra, and these were recovered and imported into the UK for display, and in some cases restoration. These ghosts are now displayed as recovered in the Wings Museum for all to see. The museum went from strength to strength and became a registered charity, and it wasn't long before a large number of fellow enthusiasts joined the Wings Museum team. Open 6 days a week with an active restoration workshop where a number of historically important airframes are being restored to their former glory. The museum is also very proud of its work in local education, with a number of structured workshops regularly being carried out for school children throughout the year. The rest, as they say, is history. The museum provides a unique place to learn about personal stories from all nations. So why Into the Atom? Our uncle served as a jet propulsion engineer during Britain's nuclear tests and worked on contaminated cameras with little or no protection. We lost Uncle Tom in 1984. Right up to his untimely death, he would not talk about his experiences during these tests. Although we knew he was involved in the tests and also witnessed several detonations, we knew very little about his time in Australia. It's this connection that has inspired us to create space in the museum to tell not only our uncle's story, but all those who took part in the tests. Into the Atom is an exciting milestone for the museum, as it allows us to step into our hugely significant Cold War history. This new exhibition is dedicated to the thousands who served and endured Britain's nuclear tests. This is their story, and it is one that deserves more recognition and should never be forgotten. For many, their service continues to affect the lives of their children and grandchildren, and possibly generations to come. Into the Atom pays homage to all those from all services that played an important part in creating Britain's nuclear deterrent. We are hugely privileged to have a number of nuclear test veterans here today, and we would like to thank each and every one of them for their service, and we hope that this display will play an important part in getting their story heard. On behalf of all the volunteers and trustees, we thank you all for joining us on this special day.
Introduce myself, I'm Alex, and Yue over the back here. We both worked on the exhibition, we designed and helped curate what you see in there today. So when Dan first approached me with the subject of this exhibition, I have to admit, I didn't really even know that this had happened. I think that highlights exactly why this exhibition is so important. The fact that I, someone who has lived and grown up in the UK, had no idea that this group of incredible brave men were putting themselves quite literally into the unknown. This story has to and needs to be told so more people can learn. So you can imagine that when I was given extensive documentation, I had some homework. What became apparent to me and Julie was hiding somewhere at the back there, she is that this material feels like an archive, a library of records, testimonies and information waiting to be discovered. The fact that these servicemen still have missing medical records and unanswered questions means that we all have a responsibility to keep researching, to come together, to learn and to share. When you encounter the main part of the exhibition, what you'll notice is that it resembles an archive, boxes filled with files. We wanted to give you, as visitors, a sense that you have the power to research, to explore, and to uncover, just as these servicemen and their families are still doing today. The exhibition has been designed to grow. As more information and evidence comes to light, we can expand it, keeping this ongoing story alive. I think that's what makes this exhibition so different. It isn't finished yet. The story is still unfolding, and many questions remain unanswered. I really encourage you sometime to come back and explore even more deeply with the material, because there's a lot to go through. Finally, I'd like to just say thank you to my friends and colleagues who have volunteered their time to help me and UA build this exhibition. Wendy Felix for their time building and painting the exhibition. Camilla for her graphic design, bringing my ideas to life in a quick time. Han, who's also at the back here, for creating 2 short films that you'll see on the main screens. And Jane for creating a 3D data visualization of the mushroom cloud. And lastly, UA and I, we are Elephant Vision Lab, and I hope you enjoy exploring into the atom. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. This is 5 years of research, and I'm just overwhelmed. And thank you guys so much. I have a script I'm going to read. It'll be a bit more fluid, but there are some themes in there. As Alex said, there's research to do here, but I just want to talk about some themes that aren't maybe you have to research to understand. I'm going to give a shout out to Canaveral B6 WH976, and that is a very important Canaveral B6 because we have a video of Terry Hilliard talking about flying the Mission Cloud, and he flew in WH976. We have Roland Adam, his son is here, who also flew in WH976. We have a video of him talking about his experience flying through a mushroom cloud and all sorts of other funny stories, which still has to come into the exhibit as it's a growing exhibit, so that will be added shortly. And we have John Robinson, who is still with us as well, nuclear cloud sampler, who is also on video, who also flew in Canaveral B6 WH976. But the last incredible flight of that airplane happened during Operation Grapple Zulu Flagpole, and I believe it was Sniff 3, known as George Dack's crew. They flew through the mushroom cloud 6 times, about 80 minutes after detonation, and 6 different cuts, a total of 12 minutes in the cloud, and when they landed, oops, one of your radiation readings wasn't working. They were only meant to get a limit of 10 R of radiation, and that crew got between 25 and 30 R of radiation. In May 2024, the British government did a document dump of all sorts of archive information. And among those files, as I was going through, I saw a navigation log with scribbles on it, looking like chicken scratches. And I saw 976, and then I saw the date. And I said, oh my goodness, that is the flight log of George Dack's crew as they're flying through the mushroom cloud. So you will see that on the wall above the food area, but if you go into the research, you'll actually see the key. There'll be the document where you can decipher what those chicken scratches mean. So that's just to give you one theme. Another thing that not quite so obvious, you have to do your Google search research in the archive. Among the watercolors, my father took out his watercolors the day after going through Grapple Y, and he recorded from memory what he saw. And that's what these watercolors are. 30 seconds after detonation, 1 minute after detonation, 5 minutes after detonation. And in one of those watercolors, you can see the power of the Grapple Y, Britain's largest detonation, as you pointed out, 3,000 kilotons. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons, Nagasaki 25 kilotons. This was 3,000 kilotons, and he saw the tropopause, that thin layer between our atmosphere and outer space, being pushed up. And that is in one of the watercolors that you wouldn't necessarily just walking by. That's a nice painting. So I'm just going to start reading now really quick to not take up too much time. We welcome you to this exhibit on the incredible Cold War work of RAF crews that not only flew through atomic and thermonuclear mushroom clouds, but also decontaminated the planes afterwards. It is truly an incredible feat that is very doubtfully ever going to be repeated again. We ask that you please keep in mind that this is quite a big story, which is part of an even bigger story, which includes the Navy vessels that sailed under fallout to take radiation readings, and the Army members who also played an important role with the facilitation of the events and also at times going to ground zero after detonations. Today, we are only showing you a small fraction of this incredible story due to the physical limits of the current exhibition space. I would like to give a special thanks to the Wings Museum, which is a charity, and for the Canberra B6 cockpit and the space to bring this epic story into the public domain. And a special shout out to Elephant Vision Labs, who've done a phenomenal job of interpreting pages and pages and pages of story and photos and history and technical radiation information, creating something so easily digestible for everyone. We could have easily filled this entire space with all the data that we have, and hence they've really excelled here. The three of us have volunteered our time and energy to make this exhibit happen today. There are no financial contributions here, such as from the National Lottery Funds, which contributed. We three groups came together and we contributed to the development of this exhibit that you see before us today. This is an exhibit born out of pure passion. As they say, when we walk alone, we can go fast, but when we walk together, we go far. Into the Atom. As you will note, the name of this exhibit is Into the Atom. This is just the first generation of the exhibit. In the future, there will be many more stories to delve into. For example, the nuclear clouds sampling undertaken by John Fawkes, who was meant to be here today but can't make it, who was in the minor trials. Buffalo. And 543 Squadron. We've got some 543 Squadron people, if you want to raise your hands, that were French nuclear tests. And they have also very important and interesting stories to tell. And we do have some information, if you did do Google deep dive into the research on 543 Squadron done by Barry Fagg, who is going a deep dive into their research. 76 Rising. Some of you here have received an invitation from an email address ending in 76 Rising. As the daughter of an RAF 76 Squadron nuclear cloud sample, this is my area of specialization. When someone dies, there's always a history, a story left behind. In my case, it was a very particular story, along with pages and pages and photos and archives and maps and logbooks, and a book called The Curse of the Nuclear Cloud Flyer. This is a very unique story, as no one will ever again be sent to fly through an atomic or thermonuclear mushroom cloud to collect radioactive samples to understand how big the bang of an atomic and thermonuclear explosion was. Or to wash down and decontaminate an aircraft used in nuclear cloud sampling in the way they did back then. Speaking to Colin yesterday, the Vickers used in the French test, they used a rag. So this is quite incredible. Why the name 76 Rising? In 1936, Cecil Lewis, who is one of the original 5 founders of the BBC, published a book called Sagittarian Rising, which recounts his experience as a pilot during World War I. It was a period where the science behind flight was still emerging, as these chaps here will be able to tell you. The time when airplanes were still being manufactured with wood frames and cloth skins. Sagittarian Rising is a work of particular note and is often cited as the first detailed description in writing about what it was like to fly in that period among the clouds. Early on in his work, Cecil Lewis conveys to the reader a sunset from the air as follows. The upper rim of the circle of fire dipped finely behind the clouds, and a bunch of rays, held as it were in some invisible quiver, shot beam high into the air, the arc of heaven, where it turned a wrath of cirrus cloud into marvelous gold. The lofty shade had covered the visible earth, and the beauty lingered only in the sky. With his word, he has captured a moment for us to feel and relive. Today, with this exhibit, we hope to also capture a moment for you to feel and relive through the eyes of the men who flew where no one will ever fly again, into the billowing, untamed folds of a freshly detonated thermonuclear cloud. Interesting, 30 years after the original book came out, in 1963, Cecil Lewis published a second edition of Sagittarius Rising, where he made a very poignant note in the preface. This is Cecil Lewis in 1963. The changes men have seen in this half-century can hardly be believed. Computers steer the Pioneer and punch cards tell the weather. Reliability is on the altar and risk is in the crypt. Loudspeakers read the timetable from the pulpit, and there's a new creed which begins. I believe in atomic fission, breaker of heaven and earth. We hope that you enjoy learning about the Cold War nuclear cloud sampling in the air and on the ground with this new historically significant and momentous exhibit into the atom. But please remember, this is only one part of a much longer story, and I can't think of anyone better to share that amazing epic tale with you than journalist Susie Bonifest, who has been writing about the British nuclear test veterans for over 15 years, and who today is also the author of the most detailed book ever written on Cold War atomic tests, Exposed: The Secret History of Britain's Nuclear Experiments. Susie Bonifest.
I've been in aerospace for 20 years. I lost my father a few weeks ago. He lived in Hand Cross, which is just down the road. So I'm going to go see it later when he grew up. I just want to say, sorry, he started me on the nuclear weapons investigation many years ago because he worked on nuclear submarines, had designed them originally. Well, it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. I would have met Simone and so many of you. And some, you know, what we meet today for a variety of reasons, but we'll try. I just wanted to say thank you. Journalism, it's often said, is the first draft of history. It's when the truth is wriggling about and people are still arguing about things. Perhaps the picture isn't clear and there's no perspective to judge things properly. I always thought history was supposed to be easier than journalism. It's in the past, the issues are long settled, it cannot be changed. So when, as a journalist, I've been asked to write about something historic, it's an easy job. It's an anniversary, it's a remembrance, it's a throwback. All you're doing is refining what people already know, maybe highlighting something that's newly relevant or reminding people about something that definitely was a thing a while ago. But with the story of the nuclear veterans, from the flyboys of 7-6 Squadron to those who had their boots on the ground, I realised very early on that everything was the wrong way around. This was unsettled and unsettling history, something where the truth is still being whipped about in political winds, and people are still feeling the turbulence of it. I knew when I was writing Exposed that it would change as I went, because I was and am still investigating what really went on during Britain's nuclear weapons tests. And having written about it at that point for 20 years, I hoped that by the end I would have some answers with which to finish the book with a flourish. And if that doesn't indicate insane levels of optimism, I don't know quite what does. The book begins with the story of the weapons test, the moment when the radiation exploded, and the events of 1952 to 63 should by now be set in stone, some kind of totemic facts of British life, like the NHS or Coronation Street. But the official narrative of what happened at Montebello, Emu Field, Maralinga and Christmas Island has been in doubt ever since 40,000 British and Commonwealth troops appeared uninvited in traditional lands under the veil of official Cold War secrecy. The uncertainty was only increased by the witness testimony over decades, and then my discovery in 2022, thanks to Simone and Joe, of orders for medical monitoring of the troops involved. Last month, far too late for the book, I was able to report how fallout had finally been found in inhabited areas at Christmas Island and covered up at the time, with scientists declaring areas clean when they knew damn well that they weren't. The second part of the book is about the fallout from those tests, the cleanups, the effects that befell the men and their families when they returned home. And that too is constantly changing, with some families able to put an uncomfortable past behind them, and others dealing with, in some cases, chronic illness, disability, and others long-term anxiety and trauma. There are widows who've raised a family, become happy and loving grandmothers, but still grieving a husband and multiple babies lost 50 years earlier. There are descendants who are both energised and damaged by what was done to their forefathers. The struggle hasn't died with the veterans, and in many cases, successive generations show a variety of problems, but it is not in their power to lessen. The third and final part of the book is about the exposure, the journalism, the cover-up, the journalists, the revelations, the admissions, the court cases, the declarations that no one was exposed, and then a few people were exposed, and then there was only low exposure. It ends with the revelation that we have discovered the blood testing information, medical data on a top secret database at the Atomic Weapons Establishment, which has been hidden behind national security for 70 years and has led to a fresh lawsuit and criminal complaints currently under consideration. The book, a BBC documentary and now a film, have contributed to greater awareness and coverage of a history that only a few of us have ever tried to correct. And now the government has ordered the opening of that database in the biggest declassification of atomic secrets in British history. Ministers have spent nearly 2 years reviewing the files, and you do not have to be too much of a cynic to think that if and when they finally admit what thousands of veterans have known all along, the official narrative will still attempt to downplay the admissions and make as few concessions as possible. Sometimes it seems history is far more battle than it really ought to be. This story is still unfinished. I have said since I started on this in 2006, and I will say again here, I only want to write one story. I want to write the one that says this is the thing that happened, the final draft of history, the one which is the truth, unarguable, undeniable, and unforgettable. That's probably another book away at least. But in the meantime, wonderful exhibits like this, the work by committed people like the Hunts, like Simone, and so many of you, the families of 76 Squadron, they continue to do a huge amount to keep this history alive and relevant to those lucky enough never to have been involved in it, and who have spent our entire lives protected by the weapons these men helped to create. Those who did not witness those detonations should be reminded forever of everything that it involved. And that task, I hope, will continue, thanks to the Wings Museum and people like Simone, long after my last story is written. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Alan Owen, representing LabRats, an organisation that looks after the nuclear test veterans. Following those is a bit difficult, Simone and Susie, and this wonderful exhibit. But I just wanted to say that this exhibition is an incredible piece of work, and we are really grateful to have this incredible dedication of people that make it possible, and it's people that make it possible. Everybody that's spoken today, people that are giving up their time, all the volunteers that are here as well, to make this happen. But it's inconceivable to most people that aircraft flew through a mushroom cloud. Start right there. Unfortunately, most people don't know about the missions that these squadrons flew. These missions, when you think about it, 76, 543. And this exhibition will ensure that the general public will now be able to understand those operations, what these men endured, and the devastating effects that it's had on the veterans, their families, and their children. I want you all to imagine being ordered to fly an aircraft through a nuclear explosion. Imagine your children being ordered to do that. In 2026, we know a lot more about the testing program. We have further evidence and documentation than we've ever had. But it's still unbelievable that they flew through that cloud. And then asked men to decontaminate those aircraft. When Joe Pasquini contacted me many years ago with this story, I knew we had to publish it. Originally as short stories and then into this wonderful book, Curse of the Nuclear Cloud Fighters. There were very few people who experienced what Joe and the other crews did, and his story needed to be told. And he wanted the world to know about his experience as a nuclear cloud fighter. And they had a unique view of the explosion, a view that no one should have seen, an experience which affected their entire lives. And the UK government initially denied these men a medal, stating they would not meet the risk or rigor. This medal that I have in my hand here, this is actually Joe's medal. This I found staggering. And we did a lot of work with Susie, did a lot of work to get this medal. But this isn't the end, because there's still men that are missing this medal, that we're still finding. The politicians who make the decisions have no concept of the testing program. Many of them were not born, have never researched it, and have never listened to the veterans that we have here today. Some do not even know that Britain tested nuclear weapons. We're at that level. But this exhibition will show them the risks they took and the rigour that they went through. Flying 8 miles above the destination as a navigator of Sniff Boss, Joe had a unique view. And Joe described his experience as flying between two suns. One 94 million miles above him, and the other, the new sun, just 8 miles below. Flying using the one-eye technique developed for night flying operations. This is one eye was kept open, the other closed. So if a bright light burnt out the retina in the back of the observer's eyeball, the other eye would hopefully still be available to see them. Think about that. So with one eye tightly closed and the other slightly opened, Joe timed the duration of the entire detonation process to a 19-second prolonged flash, from start to finish. This was the length of time it took for a hydrogen bomb detonation to expand from the size of a small motor car to a molten, swirling, perfect round ball of liquid nuclear magma, almost 2 nautical miles in diameter. So if you don't mind, I'd like everybody to take a moment just to pause and reflect on that moment. 19 seconds, just for you to think about that moment. I'm going to count 19 seconds in my head, but let's just take a moment to reflect on that moment. So a new sun had been created in the atmosphere, and it was suspended motionless a mile above the surface of the sea. Never having seen such a wonder or anything like it in his life, Joe watched with awe and wondered what was happening. And in his book, Joe says, it was like looking at and then seeing the face of God. Gathering speed as it rose, it sped past that aircraft while they were at an altitude of 9 miles. Flares of multicoloured liquid magma continued to lick around the sides of the boiling cloud as it rushed past them, travelling at more than 200 miles an hour, demonstrating the energy, the power and the violence contained within man. They've experienced all this, and then they had to perform their sampling duty. And after witnessing this incredible sight, they then did their duty. And Joe made this observation at the time. Lining up with the chosen point of penetration, the approach to the cloud was made. 2 minutes before impact, we started picking up radiation shine on our instruments. Too late to turn back, we were committed. What was inside? What would we be flying into? Would we be flying through the jaws of death? Decades later, we had our answer. We had indeed flown into the jaws of hell. With the pressure and the heat that came up with the cloud, it warmed the upper reaches of the atmosphere so much, well above freezing point, as to allow and permit the formation of rain at a high, incredibly high altitude. An amazing phenomenon which was never captured, recorded, or mentioned by the meteorological department observers or any of the MOD expert witnesses. Yet we now know that they knew. Because in the latest release of the Merlin database, which Susie explained, 28,000 documents which were hidden away in a classified archive, there's a document from the Atomic Weapons Establishment, the D.C.J. Morgan of the Ministry of Defence. It's dated the 4th of August, 1992. That's a lot of years later. It states, there's 2 fundamental points to consider. 1, if the rain forms below the rising radioactive cloud, there is no problem. 2, if it's formed within the radioactive cloud or above it, contamination will be carried down to the ground.
But it should be noted that this work is restricted, and reference to the possibility of rain being induced by detonation should be studiously avoided in any unclassified documentation. So the cloud flyers had experienced this phenomena firsthand, yet the denial was put in place. And all talk about it must be studiously avoided. So today, at the opening of this exhibit, I say, Joe, you were right.
I've got an archived piece of paper here that says, during this second cut, some light rain was observed striking the aircraft canopy. This was written by the medical officer in Grapple Y Smith Boston. My dad has written it. So we've got the proof.
They knew, but they denied it. So these are brave men. They're braver than any politician that I know. Navigating into the unknown, participating into experimental program, testing the limits of the aircraft, washing down the aircraft, making sure those aircraft that came back extremely radioactive could then be reused again and put back up, exposing themselves to these invisible bullets. These cloud fires are just one piece of the testing program, as Simona said. The men who contribute to the program across the world, the scientists, the civilian contractors, indigenous people, and all the military personnel, all must be remembered for their efforts. And we must never forget them. Future generations must be educated about the testing program, and this exhibition will do that. It will engage people into the subject. They will be amazed that these men actually carried out their orders after seeing what they saw. And I'm sure if you ask people today, would you fly through an atomic cloud? The answer would be no. We continue to work on behalf of these brave men and their families at Labrats because they deserve their story to be heard. They deserve to be recorded in history for their service and their sacrifice, because the nuclear community has suffered so much over the last 70 years, the UK government denying any responsibility for their actions. But to finish, I wanted Joe to have the final word. In his book, he says many things, makes powerful statements and details his experience, and I encourage you all to get a copy and read it because it's brilliant. But one paragraph still is true to this day. Joe says, more than 6 decades later, which we're now into, almost 7 decades later, science and technology are catching up with reality. The answers to many of the questions and phenomena that occurred on the day Grapple Yankee detonated are now readily available. And like the governments of the UK, Australia and New Zealand, together with the British legal system, they all appear to be stuck in time and living in the first industrial revolution. Time has moved on, and it's time for them to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organising the event, the exhibition and the event and so on. I kind of got involved helping out with calculating where the fallout went and so on like that in support of the some of the war pension appeals back in 2010, and somebody called Chris Busby, who is not able to attend today, but he was one scientist who valiantly championed the test veterans almost alone in the science community, because to get involved in science of nuclear weapons is to risk being, if you're involved in anything academic or military or industrial, your career is finished because you're breaking so many taboos about the nuclear industry and so on. Chris is a complete maverick, and he asked me to say, could I replicate the fallout clouds from the nuclear test series using something called NOAA, which is the American Met Office website, which simulates things like volcanic ash clouds and so on like that. And I hadn't used this before, but anybody can do it. You can put in a place and a time and a date, and the database goes back to 1947, amazingly, and very conveniently for the test data. And so I was able to go back to find the location of each of the Christmas Island tests and the date and the time, and to get the wind patterns for those tests, and put them into a bundle for Chris to take along to add into the evidence base for the nuclear test appeals. this led to meeting Joe Pasquini, autumn 2010 this year. And he had got his logbook where he kept, as they flew through the clouds, they took a radiation reading every few seconds, all the way through the cut. And I brought along some pictures which I'll to donate to your exhibition, Simone. This is a kind of a view of the cloud structure, but looking at it a little bit more from a meteorological point of view. Because there's things in here, it isn't just, if you ever wonder why a nuclear cloud is flat, it's because it hits the tropopause, which was mentioned. And it's kind of like an invisible boundary. And you see it with thunder clouds. When you see a cloud flatten off at the top, it's because rising air has hit this invisible layer and it spreads out. Something else happens up at this area. When the tests were conducted, the Ministry of Defence assured everybody that they'd only do it when it was safe to do it, when the fallout would blow offshore. And Christmas Island being in the trade wind area, that was fairly predictable that it should be okay because the wind would come from, I think, the southeast, and it will blow over the island, and it will blow all the fallout off to the west. Well, that is actually true for the first couple of thousand meters, but when we did further investigations, and Joe put me onto this, at different occasions, Joe and I both went to the Met Office archives in Exeter, and they got out, they needed some notice, they got the entire Met records for the nuclear test series, including charts about yay big. And they sent the balloons up, so they had the temperatures and the pressures and the wind directions right up to the tropopause. And so what actually happened was, much as the winds at the low level sort of blew off slightly offshore to the west of the island, as the cloud went up, at the height just below the tropopause, the wind direction changes entirely, and there's a jet stream from west to east, and most of the cloud was actually carried east of the island, so that what you described as rain, we call rainout, actually dropped the fallout from the cloud back down into the atmosphere over a couple of 100 miles to the east of the island, blowing it all gently back over the island. So all of it, anybody on the island would have been exposed to fallout from the test. That was never admitted. We got a Met Office, a meteorologist who had actually worked with the nuclear submarines, so he really understood nuclear and meteorology. And he gave some evidence for us in one of the war pension appeals. And he was struck out by the Ministry of Defence, wonderful, superb barrister, Mr. Heppenstall, who will go down in history.
Mr. Heppenstall will go down.
I was thinking you should have a Hall of Fame and a Hall of Shame in your exhibition. And Mr. Heppenstall, I will say to his face, has this appalling record in the nuclear. He managed to strike out a professor of physics from Hiroshima, one of whose students had got the Nobel Prize, as being an unsuitable witness, possibly because he was biased. He struck out Busby because he was biased, because he actually spoke on behalf. And I'm going on too long.
No, but I will say, this is...
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
What you just said there about how the cloud rises, the winds at the top go this way, the winds at the bottom go that way, and form the rain. What we heard from Joe about how obviously there's no radiation, obviously when it's lower down, if the rain forms, it's fine. The fallout report, which we've just found as a result of whistleblowers from the Atomic Weapons Establishment, which they wrote in 2014, found exactly that had happened after Grapple X and at least one or two of the Grapple Z bombs. The bomb went off, the cloud dispersed, the material fell, and it came back in over the island 6 hours later, and it fell on inhabited areas. So So you have been vindicated. Although they never missed it at the time,
Yeah.
and Heppenstall and other barristers misled those courts, and
Absolutely.
they are now under consideration by the police and others.
So, oh, sorry, this is an expanding story, and I think.
I must let you expand
Okay,
on
okay.
today. Can I just say, there's a number of other things which I should have given you before, but this is the map of the this is your dad's
Christmas
base.
Island and going around
And this
the
was
Museum
the,
Wings.
so Sniff, how many were there?
Four planes.
4 planes. Sniff Boss goes in first, goes in to see how hot it is, and then calls in the other ones. And they went through in a kind of crisscross fashion so that they could find out how wide the cloud was and how dense the radiation was. So you can see this, an example of it here. And this is Joe's work as a tribute to your fabulous stuff.
But I would like to say that Di is one of the people I'm going to be videoing because he has so much more to say. No, but it's really interesting. And as we said, this is such a huge story. There's so many different tentacles to it. But I think at the moment, we've overwhelmed people with nuclear atomic radiation, and they might need some refreshments. Do you want to say one quick thing?
One quick thing. It's absent friends. So one absent friend, for example, is Shirley Denson, who was the widow of Eric Denson, who was he Joe's pilot?
He was in
Or he was-
Sniff, the second plane that went through
was in-
Grapple Y.
He was sent through the centre of the state.
Sadly, Eric couldn't cope with this after about 11 years and took his own life. I've written a poem which was like from a conversation between him and one of his family, which is too long to read out, but I've got it here. So I'd like to remember with you, everybody who knew them. Shirley was a force of nature, and she was often at all of the appeals. And Eric was not, but he was present in spirit. Christine was the widow of Christopher Don, who was one of the pilots who flew in the first one, Grapple X, and he flew through several. So I'm remembering Christopher, and we have a whole slew of other ones, but those are particular heroes. Thank you so
And
much.
also, I actually just got some unfortunate news on Sunday. If you go in the exhibit, there'll be a small screen with headphones, and you can listen to Terry Hilliard speaking. I had the pleasure of going down to Brighton and interviewing him on my iPads about 2 years ago, and Alex has done a wonder job editing the video. I received an email a message on Sunday that we lost Terry, one of the very few living nuclear cloud samplers. I would also like to say Mike. Mike is standing by. Mike's father, Robin Adams, is one of the living nuclear cloud samplers. His father has also written a book, which is very interesting, and so if there's any press there that wants to interview a living cloud sampler, Robin, Mike's father, is a really great speaker talking about his experience. So, put your hand up so they know who you are. So I think refreshments.
Thank you, Simone.
Anything
Love
else?
everybody. Thank you so much.
The fire burned out, the warmth has gone away. The fire burned out, darling, the warmth has gone away. You turned so cold on me, baby, and you'll miss my love someday. Fire burned out, it's fading slow and deep. The fire burned out, darling, it's fading slow and deep. I'll keep on moving forward, but I'll cry myself to sleep. Like I always knew I should. Oh, you know I'm free now, honey. I'm free from your chain. Oh, free now, honey. I'm free from your chain. Just memories, all I can do is bless your name.